Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sapna Dadwal. I'm working as a professor in the Department of Management at St. Andrews Institute of Technology and Management. This is lecture 6 of Consumer Protection. This subject is taught in semester 6th of BBA course. So the topic I'm going to cover in this video lecture are Prevention of Black Marketing and Maintenance of Essential Commodities Act 1980, the Essential Commodities Act 1981, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969, the Standard of Weights and Measure Act 1976, the Consumer Protection Act 1986, the Securities and Exchange Board of India Act 1992, the Right to Information Act 2005, the Sale of Goods Act 1930, the Hire Purchase Act 1972. I'll be giving you a brief introduction of these acts and how these acts helps in protecting consumers, or what role they play in protection of consumers. Right. So I'm starting with the 11th right because the first 10 laws I have already covered in my earlier lecture, that is lecture number 4. I covered in that lecture the previous 10 laws, like the first law was like the Water Act, the Drugs and Magic Remedies Act, and then Air Act, and then Dangerous Drugs Act, the Environment Act, the Agriculture Produce Act. So these were the acts I have covered in my lecture number 4. So I'm starting with the 11th lecture, Prevention of Black Marketing and Maintenance of Essential Commodities Act 1980. This act is mainly intended for the preventive measures to control black marketing, hoarding, profiteering, and unjustified rise in price of essential commodities. As the panel provisions of the Essential Commodities Act 1955 were found inadequate to control the then prevailing situation, this act was enacted to protect the interest of the consumers. So it empowers the government to take any person who is likely to include or indulge in black marketing, hoarding, price rise, etc. under the preventive detention. Now the next act is the Essential Commodities Act 1981. So in the preamble of the act, it is stated that it is an act to make a certain provisions by way of amendment to the Essential Commodities Act 1955 for a temporary period of 15 years for dealing more effectively with the persons indulging in hoarding and black marketing of essential commodities. So this act is actually deals with the amendments. Now the next is the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954. So this legislation has been brought in order to ensure safe food articles and preserve goods health of people. This act not only prohibits adulteration of food but also prohibits the import into India of any food articles which are adulterated or misbranded by appropriate laboratory, and take necessary penal action on those who contravene the provision of the act. So under this act, the medical practitioners in any local area must report all the cases of food poisoning coming within their cognizance to authorities. So this is their duty to report the act to the concerned authorities in their area, or the cases if the cases are coming of food poisoning. So this is the responsibility of the doctors. Now the next act is the Sale of Goods Act 1930. This act imparts the following obligation on the seller in the contract of sale. He must have the title to the goods, and it means he must have the right to sell the goods. then seller has to guarantee that buyer shall enjoy a quiet possession of goods. Then goods are free from any charge and the goods are fit to use by the buyer. So these are the requirement, or these are the conditions which a seller has to imply with or has to comply with before selling goods to the buyer. Now the next act is the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. This act was enacted with the view to ensure that the operations of the economic system does not result in the concentration of economic power to common detriment, and to ensure that there are no monopolies, and also to prohibit monopolistic, restrictive and unfair trade practices. So the Act provides mechanism to make inquiries and to take suitable actions to remove the undesirable effect of monopolies, effect of monopolistic, restrictive and unfair trade practices. So it's very clear from this that what are the objectives of monopolies and restrictive trade practices. So the mechanism which was established under this by this law is called as MRTP Commission, situated in Delhi. The commission is empowered to grant a temporary injunction and compensation, but Government of India passed a Competition Act to replace MRTP Act recently, as the Competition Commission had not been constituted due to a certain legal hassles. So the MRTP Commission is still in existence. So the moment Competition Commission comes into existence, the MRTP Commission will be disclosed, transferring all the pending files to Competition Commission. So now the next is the Hire Purchase Act 1972. So in order to facilitate the economically weaker section, particularly the middle class, to purchase goods or services as per their wants, the marketer invented new schemes to unload their product in the customer's house and collect the prices in installments. So these marketing techniques to provide purchasing capacity to the low income group for the purchase of rather luxury items is groomed into hire purchase agreement between the seller and the purchaser. It starts as a contract of hire and culminate into the sale contract. So in other words, it is an agreement for hire with an option to hirer to purchase the goods, particularly to protect the interest of the buyer or interest of the consumers. This act has provisions that gives right to obtain from time to time the statement of his account in relation to the agreement. So in the Hire Purchase Act also, the buyer should enjoy a quiet possession of goods. Now the next act is the Standard of Weight and Measurement Act 1976. So in Measures of Length Act 1889, a Standard of Weight Act 1939, which were in the vogue prior to 1956, the standards prescribed were the seer, the pound and the yard. But the standards were not uniformly followed throughout the country. So in this respect, these two acts become ineffective. Hence, Standard of Measures and Weight Act was enacted in 1976 to replace these two acts and to provide primary unit of length, primary unit of mass and standard unit of weight, unit of electric current, unit of time, etc. to people. So this Act was also replaced by existing, namely a Standard of Weight and Measures Act 1976, with a view to establish standard of weights and measures in metric system. So 1976 Act establishes the weight and length in metric system. So this act provides for the establishment of Indian Institute of Legal Metrology for training inspectors and others. So there are penalty provisions in the act to punish those who use non-standard weights and measures. So Department of Legal Metrology established by various state government would implement the provision of this act. Now, this act has brought a uniformity in the weights and standards in the country. Prior to this, there were no uniformity in the weights followed by the sellers in the country. Now, the next act is Consumer Protection Act 1986. The Consumer Protection Act 1986 was enacted in accordance with guidelines adopted by United Nations. So many countries has made consumer protection legislation or amended their existing laws in force to provide better protection to the consumers. The Indian legislation is acclaimed as the best legislation in the world. But this Consumer Protection Act I am going to discuss in my further lectures. So I've just given you a brief idea about this act in this lecture, because this lecture I'm going to discuss in detail in my next lectures. Now the next law is the Securities and Exchange Board of India Act 1992. This act provides for establishment of board to protect the interest of the investors in securities and to promote development of and to regulate the securities market and for matters connected therewith. So, as per the provision of this act, Securities and Exchange Board of India was established. And the board has powers to establish other offices at other places in India. Now, the last law, the Right to Information Act 2005. After 58 years of independence, the Indian citizen could finally or find a day to have liberalized access to information through Right to Information Act. The role of government in public life cannot be overemphasized. So the Right to Information Act provides access to information and control of public authorities. The Act is entitled to promote transparency and accountability in the working of every public authority. So it is very clear from this why RTI Act was established, what were the objectives of RTI Act. So these are the laws I've discussed, and these laws comes under the consumer protection laws. The first mechanism which has been established by Government of India for the protection of consumers. Now these are the questions which are related to the above laws which I have discussed in this lecture. If any query is there, please do contact me, and please do ignore the writing mistakes. I know there are writing mistakes. Please ignore those writing mistakes. Thank you. Thank you so much.